Thank you, Mr. Karthik. It's a pleasure to be out here. It's a pleasure to see all the other members of the panel also out here. And I see a host of educators, I mean, a group of educators joining in by the minute. This is absolutely impressive. I'm actually on a flight across countries. So I stopped at a lounge because I told Karthik that I will necessarily join this workshop as a panel host. So let me quickly welcome all the esteemed panelists out here. Ms. Natalie Rudner, Director of Academics, Rosedale Academy, Mr. Raylan, Dr. Neeta Bali, Ms. Sudha Goyal, Ms. Geeta Jagannathan, Mr. Rajesh Vasudevan, and of course, Ms. Sonia Mehta, who's also here. It's a privilege to have you all here. Absolutely no words to describe the impact that your presence and this workshop is going to have on educators from various of India's leading schools, I would say leading global schools. Now, very quickly going on to CI, I'll very quickly give a background of Confederation of Educational Institutions of India. CI is India's leading not-for-profit confederation for the promotion of global knowledge, research, education, and training initiatives. We are passionately committed to providing students, educators, organizations, and communities with innovative value-creating educational solutions to contribute to and improve society. One of the most important objectives of CI is aligning with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 targets. CI is focused on fostering Indian school and college students as global youth leaders who can catalyze chain reactions of positive change. And that is precisely why the theme for our educational programs in this series is constructing a sustainable future. And in this regard, we are now bringing to Indian educators and students a series of training workshops conducted by global leaders like Rosedale, which are absolutely impressive with respect to their OSSD curriculum, which is the Ontario Secondary School Diploma curriculum. And we are very proud to be associated with Rosedale out here. And we hope to introduce Rosedale in the coming months to various schools and various educators, their services, and how they can benefit not just teachers, but also students in undertaking global diplomas and global certifications, which can allow their path to a global career go ahead. With these words, I hand over the floor back to Karthik. Karthik, thanks so much once again for inviting me. I would come back at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your valuable speech, sir. And I would request Mr. Raylon to take over the session from here.
Thank you, Mr. Karthik, and thank you, Dr. Sandeep, for that kind introduction as well to CEII and Rosedale Academy. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all today. My name is Raylon Nazareth. I come from Rosedale Academy. Specifically, I work in global education partnerships, and we're very excited to be a part of this workshop with fellow colleagues and leaders in education. I'm going to provide a brief background into Rosedale Academy and a little bit about our institution, and then turn it over to Mrs. Rudner to take over the workshop. I could just get the presentation up.
Could we please have permission to share? Karthik, we're not able to share our screen. Oh, now I am.
Okay.
Now I am, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, great. So everyone can see the screen, I hope. So welcome, everybody. And to give you a bit of an overview on Rosedale, our vision as an organization is to create life-changing learning outcomes through a transformative approach to learning. So
I think I'm sharing. Sorry, are you seeing the proper screen or are you seeing the background screen? Just sorry.
We're seeing the screen, yes.
Which screen, sorry? The proper one, the full?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, my apologies.
Perfect, no, thank you. So our vision as an organization is to create life-changing learning outcomes through a transformative approach to learning. And who we are as an organization at Rosedale International Education, we're a leading practitioner and solution provider in scaling the delivery of global K-12 differentiated education. We're based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, but if you take a look at our lovely map of where we are around the world, you'll see that there's literally a number of countries all over. People often ask, where is Rosedale Academy? And we do like to say Rosedale Academy is truly around the world. We work with a variety of excellent partner education institutions that provide high quality programming in their country. We are governed and authorized by the Ontario Ministry of Education as an inspected private secondary school. That's Rosedale Academy itself. But we deliver our programs worldwide. And we have more than 51 partner schools worldwide that offer our programs to over 6,500 students with more than 55,000 enrollments. As a global high school operated under Rosedale International, our school is dedicated to building strong partnerships with top leading institutions around the world to provide students with access to differentiated education with an emphasis on higher order thinking skill development while studying within the classroom. So with that being said, I would like to introduce you all to our lovely speaker today, Mrs. Natalie Rudner, on our topic on asking the right question. So Mrs. Rudner is the Director of Academics at Rosedale Academy. She leads Rosedale's global high school program in the areas of curriculum development, teacher training, and co-curricular projects, ensuring distinction in learning, teaching, and continuous advancement across all of our partner schools worldwide. Prior to joining Rosedale, Mrs. Rudner was president of the Board of Directors of Science Teachers Association of Ontario and a co-chair for its annual conference for science educators across Ontario. She's also organized diverse events to engage Canadian educators in STEM across Ontario for professional learning and community building. Mrs. Rudner is also on the Educator Advisory Panel for Let's Talk Science, a leading organization that prepares Canadian youth for careers in STEM. In addition to teaching within the York Region District School Board, she was the Assistant Department Head of Science and a curriculum consultant, contributing to the capacity building of educators and system leaders with their expertise in K-12 science curriculum, assessment, differentiated instruction, instructional leadership, inquiry-based learning, critical thinking, design thinking, and growth mindset. Last but not least, I should also mention that Mrs. Rudner was the 2009 recipient of the prestigious Canadian Prime Minister's Award for Teaching Excellence in STEM, one of the nation's highest academic awards for Canadian educators. Mrs. Rudner, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raylon, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be joining you from Toronto this morning, and we'll get started. So today we're going to talk about asking the right questions, strategies to improve student learning in class, and we're going to take a look at some strategies that are tried and true and some suggestions and tips and tricks to help get you students engaged in some of those higher order thinking. So we are going to take a look. We like to start our presentations with a series of learning goals. So today what we're going to be looking at is identifying the purpose of different types and levels of questions to reveal student higher order thinking in class. So we'll be looking at a variety of different types and sort of thinking about why we choose the questions we choose. We're going to be understanding how to promote thoughtful responses because we know that just asking questions is not enough. We need students to be able to engage and provide us with thoughtful answers and answers that demonstrate that they understand what they're learning about. And we're going to be looking at a variety of different questioning strategies that we can use to engage all of our students in the classroom. Excuse me. So I'd like to start us off with just a small quote here that says, "Good teaching is more of a giving of right questions than the giving of right answers." When we lead our classrooms, and you picture yourself in the front of your class, we are often tempted, or we often do, ask questions of our students. And what we know is that the best way to get our students to engage is to make sure that we are asking the right questions. We know our students are not always going to have the right answers because they don't always know the answer. They might have misguided thinking, they might have misconceptions. But if we ask the right questions, that's a very, very powerful tool to helping our students move towards the right answers. And so today what we're going to focus on is how do we answer those right, or how do we ask those right questions of our students? And how do we set up our students so that they have an opportunity to give answers to those questions? So the first thing that we need to think about when we're talking about building a classroom and helping make our students really think and become really good thinkers and higher order thinkers is we need to build a culture for thinking. And so when we build a culture for thinking, there are a lot of things that go into it. And we're going to look at the role of questioning in how we can build that culture for thinking. So today we're going to talk about the role of important questions. We're going to talk about the role of strategic questioning. And then we're going to talk about and for me, most importantly, how we ask students to respond to those questions in class, because that really speaks to the engagement of our students and also the ability for us to actually gain information, valuable information that we can use as teachers around our students. So we're going to take a look at how we can develop these three elements, which will contribute to this culture for thinking in our classrooms, because we know that today's students are going to require, a much greater ability to think and to use their higher order thinking skills in order to be able to make decisions and participate in the global world. So the first thing that we need to start off, and we all do this in a variety of different ways, but it's extremely important if we want to engage students in conversation or really encourage them to participate in class, is to build a safe space. And how you build your classroom norms is there's lots of different ways of doing it, but it's something that must happen in order for students to be able to feel comfortable to share their ideas. And I think it's really important that when we build our classroom communities, that we let students know that it's okay to make mistakes and that you're not going to have the correct answer every single time. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to deal with that when students answer questions in the past. We want creative ideas. We want new ideas. We don't want just regurgitation of the content that students have studied. And that's where we start to get students into that higher order thinking. We want them to come up with their own original thoughts about the learning and the content. Doesn't mean that they're coming up with wild and crazy ideas, but we want to see how they synthesize it and apply it and transfer their knowledge from one area to another. In a safe space, we're going to celebrate each other's success. We respect each other. And we try our best, and we respect that we are trying our best, and we make sure that everybody feels comfortable giving their best try within that classroom. And then the other thing is that learning is a team effort. So whether or not you are the teacher, you are the student, we're actually all working together towards the same goal, which is to help the students learn and develop comfort and proficiency with the content that they are studying. So when we talk about all of these strategies today, most of them will only work in a classroom where students feel safe. And so especially as we return after the pandemic and we start coming back into classrooms where students have maybe been online and they haven't been with their peers, this building of a safe space is going to be extremely important for our students, because many of them have been isolated or have not had that, had not been exposed for a significant period of time to situations where they might have to speak out and share their ideas in front of other students. So building a culture of thinking starts by building a safe space in our classroom. Now, we talked about the different aspects of building that culture of thinking, and we're going to start just talking a little bit about what quality questions are. I know as a young teacher, I used to get up in front of my class and I used to say, does everybody understand? And very quickly, I realized that I was faced with, students just staring at me and not answering. And then I realized that that wasn't really the question that I wanted to answer. And so we need to make sure that when we're asking questions, that we're doing it in a very purposeful manner. And so, for example, we need to know that the questions that we're asking of our students have to be related to the content of the learning. So in other words, if you're teaching a lesson on cells in biology, your questions are going to be related to cells in biology. And that goes without saying, and most teachers would say, yeah, I get that. No problem. They have to have a clear instructional purpose. And this is where it gets a little bit muddied, because sometimes we actually as teachers don't really plan to ask questions. They just kind of happen in class. And as a result, sometimes the questions we ask are actually not necessarily the best questions that we want to ask. So we need to really make sure that we're clear on our instructional purpose, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what those purposes are. We also need to make sure that a good question actually asks the expected level of cognitive processing. So in other words, are we asking questions to students so that they think deeply? Or are we asking them questions that are strictly recall, and we're just testing whether or not they remember the notes that we put on the board 5 minutes prior? So if we want students to think, we need to make sure that we're asking the right questions of our students using the right sentence or the question starters, and we'll look at some of those as well. And finally, and this goes without saying, is that they need to be clear, succinct, and understandable. And unfortunately, when we ask questions, sometimes our questions are not the clearest. Sometimes they are not particularly well phrased because we're asking them in a rush. And so there are some strategies to make sure that those questions for our students are really clear. And if they're not, how can we help students understand what we're actually asking? So we have our first poll here, and I believe this is set up as a choose one, which is going to be a little challenging. But which of the following statements best describes why you ask questions in class? So I'm going to ask that you select the one that is the predominant reason that you ask questions in class, recognizing that you probably ask questions for all these different things. So do you use questions to see what your students already know? Do you use them to motivate your students to learn? Do you use them to check for student understanding? Or do you use questions to better understand student thinking? And I'll be upfront, there is no correct answer, but I'm just curious to know which one would you describe as your best, or how you, the main reason that you ask questions in class? And I'll just ask that when we've had a chance to get most of the responses, if the responses could be displayed for us, that would be great.
Sure, Natalie. Let's just wait for half more minute, and then we can display the results.
Not a problem. Okay, so fantastic. So we see almost half of you use questions to better understand student thinking and to check for understanding. There's some for checking for understanding and motivating your students to learn and checking to see what they know. So all of these are actually very good reasons why we ask questions. And I know that most of you will ask or do a variety of those different things. So what we're going to do today is we're really going to focus on how we can use questions to check for student understanding, but also to better understand student thinking. So hopefully there will be some new strategies or some new things to take away about that. I know that even as an experienced teacher, I know that I don't ask the best questions some days. And so I'm always challenging myself to really think about what are the good questions that I need to answer in my class, or ask in my class, sorry. So we're going to start by taking a look at the function of questions. And this really speaks to the reason why we ask questions. Not all questions are equal. And we need to be really careful about the type of questions that we choose. And some of this we do instinctively, and some of this we need to really think about as we're planning our lessons and we're planning how we're going to deliver those lessons. So there are basically 10 functions of a question that have been identified and that are used fairly commonly. Some we use more frequently than others. And so, as we go through these, I'd like you to think about which of the types of questions are the ones that you're using in your classroom or with your students more frequently, and which ones maybe are questions that you haven't really had a chance to try, or that you're not consciously using those types of questions. Because really, when we're talking about questioning, we're really talking about being conscious as an educator of what the purpose of our questions is. We're being very mindful of the types of questions we're asking. So the first big question that we might want to ask, and we might use this to frame a course or a unit, is what we consider to be an essential question. And the essential question basically provides focus for a unit of study, and it may form or give you the instructional goal or objective for the course, the unit, the lesson. So those are really the big questions. So what does it mean to be a global citizen? What does it mean to be Canadian? what are, the essential components of life. So those are all sort of some of the essential questions that you might want to consider. They're not the questions that you would ask necessarily during a lesson. They would be probably asked before the lesson, or at the beginning of the lesson, where you're trying to frame the learning for the day. This one is often one that we use to try and motivate our students and get them involved, which is the hook question. And the hook question basically motivates students to become actively engaged in the new content. And that's often, we come up with an interesting question, something that's going to relate to the students. We maybe ask them to reflect personally on something. And basically the purpose of that question is to really get the students' attention and to have them participate. So those are, sometimes can be quite fun. I often use those in sort of in an online environment. I mean, I use them in regular class, but in the online environment, one of the things that we do is we do something what we call a waterfall. So what we'll do is we'll ask the question, we'll come up with an interesting hook question for the students, ask them to think about it, and then have everybody submit their answer in the chat at one time. So that everybody types it in, and then when we're ready, I'll say 1, 2, 3 waterfall, or 3, 2, 1 waterfall. And when I say the word waterfall, all of my students will hit enter. And so in the chat, we'll see a long string of all the answers. What's nice about that is that it engages the students in the learning, but it also allows the students to express their ideas, and they're not being singled out because they're not the only student putting an answer into the chat. So that's one strategy that works really well in the online environment to get students to answer a question like a hook question or something else like that. Diagnostic reasons. Okay, we activate our prior knowledge and preconceptions related to a new unit or lesson. Sometimes we have students coming in and we really want to know what they understand. This is going to be extremely important as we come back to the class and we're not really 100% sure of where students are at in their learning. But it's good practice all the time to ask those questions of what do you already know about a particular topic? Because sometimes the students surprise us, and also it can reveal misconceptions and thinking of the students that maybe is incorrect, and so is going to help us direct the direction of our lesson. Check for understanding. Obviously, that's one of the most common things that we do as teachers, is that we want to know if students understand. We have to be careful though with the check for understanding questions, because we tend to sometimes ask, and default is, okay, does everybody understand what I just said? And that is not a good question, because it's a yes or no question, first of all, and nobody's going to answer no in a classroom, particularly if it's a large setting, because nobody wants to be embarrassed and nobody wants to admit that maybe they didn't quite understand because they're not sure. Chances are, if one student didn't understand, there are many more, but students don't see it from that perspective. So when we're asking for check for understanding, we really want to make sure that we're asking questions that are more than just, did everybody get that? Did everybody understand? And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the questions that we can ask to help promote that as well. Also, when we're checking for understanding, we're not just checking for recall. We don't want just students to be able to regurgitate the answer. We want them to be able to apply the knowledge that we've talked about and sort of reveal their thinking. We can ask questions to probe. In other words, a student might give an answer, but we might not be given enough information, or we might not understand their thinking. So we might probe for further information to understand where the students are coming from. Okay, so you might ask students to explain why they came to a conclusion, or provide some evidence or some reason. And they might not initially give that information to you, but you might need to dig a little bit deeper and kind of pull it out of them. We ask inferencing questions. We're asking students to go beyond information or evidence and draw tentative conclusions. We tend to do that in science. We tend to do that in, in other disciplines, where we ask, well, based on what we know, how do you think it might have influenced? What might have happened differently? So those are types of questions that are interesting. Particularly, they do help reflect student thinking as well. Interpretation. Okay, so what is the student's analysis of a product, an event, or a big idea or concept? So if they're reading a text, well, what do you think the author's interpretation is? Why do you think they're thinking that? What does it mean to you? How does that relate to something that you're familiar with? So giving students the opportunity to interpret the texts or the content that they're reading can be very helpful as well. Transfer questions, which are asking students to apply knowledge in novel settings. So in other words, can they take that knowledge and apply it to a new scenario? And that's often really sort of a measure of, can the students apply their knowledge to new scenarios? And we know that that's a sign of, really good higher order thinking if students are able to take what they've learned in one context and apply it somewhere else. Predictive, are they able to develop hypotheses? And are they be able to take knowledge and from that sort of come up with plausible conclusions based on that? And then finally, the last one, which we sometimes kind of omit, but really important, is asking students reflective questions to reflect on their own learning and where they are thinking, and asking students to, really take ownership of their learning. And so some of those reflective questions are really, really good in asking students to think about their personal investment, their personal relationship with the learning that they've done. And so those are the 10 sort of functions of questions. I'm sure there are more, but those are the main ones that have been identified as being key in the classroom. We don't use them all the time, and they're not all appropriate to use all the time. So it's really going to depend on the context that you are using or that you are in to decide which questions that you're going to be using. So this is where we get to the whole point about questioning being very strategic. So strategic questioning is choosing the types of questions that are going to be specific to the instructional purpose or the function that you want. So if you were designing a lesson and you're planning your lesson, at the beginning of the lesson, you might want a hook question. You might want a diagnostic question or two to be able to find out where students are thinking about a particular topic. And then halfway through the lesson, you might want to start asking some check for understanding questions. Maybe you want to ask a predictive question or interpretation question. Depending on what it is that you want, you're going to change up the types of questions that you ask. You're going to avoid the general questions like, do you understand? Or did everybody get that? Or does anybody have any questions? I mean, does anybody have any questions is a bit of a different case, but you want to be careful about how you ask your questions. And we want to ask the questions, more importantly, not only making sure that we're asking appropriate questions, but that we're asking questions in a way that is going to give students a very thoughtful response or give them an opportunity to actually think about the answer and not just kind of answer quickly or answer with a yes, no. One of the favorite, I think very, very early on in my teaching career, I had a mentor teacher who was talking to me, and I had taught a lesson. I thought I'd done an okay job. And at the end of the lesson, they pointed out and they said, you asked a number of questions during the class. And I said, yes. And they said, you asked them and they all started with the, can somebody tell me? Can you just, can somebody describe? Can somebody tell me? Can you give me the answer to? And my mentor teacher looked at me and says, those are all yes, no questions. They don't actually, in order to answer them, a student could just give you a yes or a no. Now, most students will be kind and they will answer the intent of the question. But really, you need to pay attention to the type of language that you use when you ask a question. So ever since then, I've always been very, very conscious of using the can somebody tell me in a class, because really it's a yes or no question. And you put yourselves in a very difficult situation when the student says, nope, can't tell you, because now all of a sudden you shut down that conversation. So something to be really careful about is how to ask those questions. And just something as simple as changing the language by which you ask a question can really have a huge impact on your classroom. So let's talk a little bit about asking questions at different levels. And so we know we've got Bloom's taxonomy, and we know that in a classroom in effective teaching that we are going to need to ask questions of different levels for students, because there will be times where it is appropriate to ask what I consider to be a recall question or a look it up question. Sometimes we do just want the students to tell us what the facts are. So these first questions, usually level 1 and 2, which is the remembering and understanding of Bloom's taxonomy, are actually what we consider to be sort of, they're the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy, but they're critical in understanding and engaging in higher order thinking, because if the students don't have an understanding or remember the content, they're never going to be able to get to the higher order thinking. So these are the questions that I would consider to be the Googleable questions. They're the ones that students can look it up. They're the ones that, they can go back to their notes, they can go online, they can find the answers for those. They don't require a lot of student thinking, but they do require a lot of student recall or some basic understanding, but they can very easily find these answers. And so you can see there's a wide variety of different prompts. And I noticed that snuck in there is the can you explain why? A better question would be explain why. So drop the can, just go straight to what you want the students to do. The second slide here shows the next two levels, the applying and the analyzing. So now we're getting into questions which are asking students to start thinking a little bit more deeply and actually applying and synthesizing the information that they've been given in your class. So what examples can you find? What approach could you use? How could you show, or how would you show? What questions might you have about this? What was the problem with? What might have happened if something hadn't happened, or why did these changes occur? So you start to get into questions which are actually starting to get students to think at a little bit higher level. And so ultimately, this is where we want to start to get the students to move from those basic recall questions, because those are just, recall of the facts, to really starting to get them to process the information that they're being given. And then we finally end up with our higher level questions, where we want the students to be able to evaluate, defend a position, take a course of action, make some reasoned arguments about why their answer is the way it is. And so this is where we really are pushing the higher order thinking, and we're really engaging those students in that higher order thinking. So we want them to be able to justify and defend their positions. We may want them to come up with new ideas or propose new solutions. So those are all different types of questions that we can ask, and there's many, many more, but these question starters really sort of help us understand the different levels of that cognitive processing. If you ask a student a question that is strictly in the remembering category, using, list, describe, what are, you're not going to be getting the students to give you a higher level answer. So the question that you ask is actually directly connected to the quality of the answer that you get from the student. So the better the question that you ask, the better the response from the student is going to be. So if you want a higher order thinking answer, and you want the students to demonstrate evidence, and you want them to support their thinking, and you want them to justify their arguments, you need to make sure that you're asking questions that actually ask that of the students. Students are very good at asking you or answering what you ask them for the most part. They might not get it right, but they will. So if you tell them to list something, they're going to list something. But if you wanted them to give you an explanation, then you can't just ask them to list something, because that's asking them for something that you haven't actually made clear to them. So the clearer the question, the better the student response is going to be. And so that is the challenge that we have when we're asking questions, is that I always take a step back when I ask a question and I get an answer from a student. I ask myself, did I get the answer that I wanted? And if not, was it because I asked the wrong question? Or is it because the student didn't answer my question? And 9 times out of 10, it's I didn't actually ask the right question. And so then I have to go back and rephrase the question and ask it again. So that's something to be really mindful of when you're asking questions of your students. So basically, it comes down to questioning. Good questioning actually requires a lot of careful planning. Doesn't mean you can't ask questions on the fly, but when you plan your lesson, you're going to want to think about what are the questions that you're going to ask. And I like to plan 2 or 3 questions prior to my lesson of really key critical thinking, higher order thinking questions that I want my students to actually answer. And then I find the appropriate time during the lesson and I will ask those questions. The other questions then start to flow more naturally, and you start to ask better questions, because the more you think about what you're going to ask, the better questions you get, the better answers you get from students. And so these are just some of the things you might want to think about. Am I asking open or closed questions? What kind of response do I want from the students? And that's really critical, because if I want a higher order thinking response from the students, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm asking a higher order thinking question. If I just want them to give me a definition, then I can ask just that recall type question. So really, really being clear on what question I want to ask is going to really make a huge difference in my student answers. And then I have to think about, well, how am I going to answer the incorrect answers, and how am I going to answer it when the students don't want to answer at all? And so that's going to lead us to this. So what happens when you ask a question? And I want you to select all of the statement. Oh, it's a single choice. Okay, not a problem. So we're going to, that's my fault. I didn't specify. So I would like you to choose the response that you get the most frequently when you ask a student, or when you ask a question in your class, the response you get most frequently. Okay, and if we could get those poll results. Absolutely. So the same few students always volunteer to answer the question, even when they don't have the, and often some of those students don't always have the right answer. So I would say that that's probably true of almost every teacher around the world. We get the same thing in Canada as well, that it's always the same 2 or 3 students or handful of students, depending on the size of the class, who are willing to answer those questions. And while it's always encouraging to see that there's a couple of students to answer, that's not what we want. So we're going to talk about some strategies to help actually get more students to answer and hopefully get better answers from those students. So it's reassuring to know that students behave the same way all over the world when we ask questions in class. So and I'll go on to the next. There we go. So the first strategy that I would highly recommend, and we do this naturally, but we actually don't necessarily do it effectively in many cases, is wait time. So when we ask a question in class, we often think we're waiting for a student to answer, but usually those few students who always have the answer, their hands go up immediately after you've asked the question. So the challenge as a teacher is we're so happy to see students raise their hand, we often call on them. So the challenge is we want to stop that. So we want to wait at least 3 to 5 seconds before you answer. And believe it or not, 3 to 5 seconds seems like a really long time as a teacher. If you count slowly, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, that silence as you're waiting for students to respond is painful, and we don't like that as teachers. So we know that we need to try. So actually purposely count it out, count it down on your fingers, count it out in your head, wait for the students to answer. The students will not, most students, if they know that there are 2, 3 people in the class that are going to answer the question right away, aren't even going to think about the question. They're not even going to engage because they know that the student that's sitting next to them is going to answer it, so they don't have to do any work. So they're just going to sit there passively. But if you wait and tell the class that you're going to wait, because sometimes it's a bit of an unnatural thing when you're sitting there silently and the students are going, oh, what's going on, why they're not answering. Tell them, I'm going to wait. I'm going to give everybody time to think about this. And then you give them time, and then you sort of engage in soliciting student answers. You will get a few more students, a few, not many, but a few more. So you need to be comfortable with the silence, and you need to allow students time to think and process the question. Often we forget that students process at different speeds. And so sometimes when we ask a question, we assume that everybody got the question and has the answer on the on the tip of their tongue. And that's not the case. We know that students need to have time to process the question. So by giving them this little bit of time, it does allow them to do that. The other thing that we don't like is we don't like the silence. So in the event that nobody answers or there's no hands that go up, we tend to jump in and answer our own question. We can't do that as teachers. We ask the question of the students. We don't need to know what we think. We need to know what they think. So this wait time piece is really, really critical in terms of engaging our students in thoughtful response. And it's actually quite difficult the first few times you use it as a teacher, because that silence is very, very painful. So try not to be tempted. Try not to fill the silence. The other thing we sometimes do too is we talk. So we'll give them 3 to 5 seconds, and then we keep talking and sort of rephrasing the question and asking them to think. And so we don't actually give them quiet time to think. So really give them some quiet time to think about their answers. This is probably the most powerful piece here. So the wait time is critical, but we want them to promote, we want them to talk, and we want them to share their answers. So when I'm talking about promoting talk, what I'm asking is that even in a very, very large class, is that we're giving students an opportunity to test their ideas before they need to share them out to the larger group. Most students will not share their ideas with the larger group because they're afraid to be wrong. And sometimes just the sheer act of having their answer validated by another classmate will actually make them more comfortable sharing their ideas with the classroom. So we want to provide an opportunity for students to talk to each other after you've asked a question. Not every question, but at key moments where it's really an important question, when it's that really important question that you want students to think about, you're going to give them an opportunity to talk. You're going to use a strategy to allow them to process and think before answering, and we're going to talk about a couple of those strategies. And it's going to give an opportunity to all students to answer, because you're going to make it very clear that you're not just going to call on the first hand that gets picked up or it gets put up, because you want all students to have an answer to this question. The don'ts, you don't always want to call on the same student once you've given them an opportunity to think about their question. You don't always want to choose the first hand that's up. It's not a race to figure out who has the right answer. So often I will wait until I see at least a number of hands up before I pick somebody. And you don't want to just select students that will have the correct answers. And this is sometimes, it's nice. Sometimes we want to just move the lesson along. We want to make sure that they have the right answers, because it's awkward having to redirect a student who's been incorrect. But it actually, as a teacher, is a very teachable moment, because if one student has an incorrect answer, chances are most of your students, or a number of students in the class, have the same incorrect answer. So this is a great teaching opportunity if a student actually does share an incorrect answer with the class. So how can we do that? The first strategy that works almost every single time is what we call a think, pair, share. I really like this strategy because it works with a small group, it works with a huge class. So it doesn't matter if you have 50 students in the class, it doesn't matter if you have 100 people in the room. If you have people do a think, pair, share or a modification of it, you actually get much, much better answers. So this one I've played with this and experimented it time and time again. You ask a question and you get blank stares, you get 2 or 3 hands up and nobody wants to answer. You ask the same question and you ask people to think about it for a period of time, usually no longer than a minute. Then you ask them to turn to the person next to them or to a partner and discuss their answer to the question with that partner. And each partner has to share their answer. And then you ask them to share with the larger group. And what happens is that all of a sudden you will get more hands up willing to answer that question, because the students have had an opportunity to bounce their idea off a friend or a classmate, and they will have had it validated. So they've had the time to think about the question, they've had a time to give an answer to a friend, had it validated in a less threatening environment. And now when you call upon them, they're actually going to be more willing to share their idea, because they know that somebody in the room at least thinks that they're correct. And so this is a great way of getting people to participate and students to participate in answering questions through the think, pair, share. It does take a little bit of time to do it properly, to give them the time to have those discussions. So sometimes that might not be, feasible in the class, because maybe it's just a quick question and it's not really worthy of a 5-minute discussion. So then a simple strategy is just turn and talk. Ask students to turn to their elbow partner, give them 30 seconds to a minute to quickly have a conversation with your friend about the topic that we've just asked or the question. And then you ask them and say, okay, and then you call upon the students to answer. And you can either ask for students to raise their hand, or you can go ahead and just ask for students and call on students randomly. Now, that's something called no hands questioning. So no hands questioning is a little bit different, is that you don't ask the same student, you don't ask students to raise their hand. Instead, what you're going to do is you tell the students up front that once they've had an opportunity to discuss the question and they have an answer, everybody needs to have some sort of an answer, because you're going to ask a variety of different students randomly throughout the classroom. So this allows you to call on students that you would like to hear from. Now, you have to be careful about, some students get very upset and get very nervous, but there's ways of approaching the students, perhaps during their turn and talk, where you go up to them and say, you know what, I'm just giving you the heads up, I'm going to ask you to share, if you know that a student gets very, very nervous. Or you make it very clear to everybody that everybody needs to do. So different ways. You have to know your students as to whether or not the no hands questioning will work. But I would suggest that you start off the practice with very sort of, low stakes, non-threatening questions. You would ask the question, you would use the wait time, you might have them turn and talk, you might have them do a think, pair, share, and then you would call on students randomly. If you're walking around your classroom as a classroom teacher, what I like to do is I like to hear and listen, so that I will go over to the students I'm thinking of calling about, not letting them know that I'm going to call on them, but just to overhear their conversations if they're having that conversation, to make sure that they're on the right track, so that that I know that in calling on them, they're not going to be, completely put out, because I don't want their first time being called upon necessarily to be traumatic, where they feel that they really don't know the answer. So I will always, very carefully select the students in a no hands questioning, but I try to make it look as random as possible. And then you'll have some students who will, the ones who always put their hands up are but you never call on me anymore. And so sometimes you'll have to have a conversation with those students saying, I'd like to hear the voices of everybody in the class. And I know that you have an answer, but it's really important for me to hear everybody. So things to think about as you're answering questions. 2 or 3 before me. This is a case where basically you ask the question, or you ask the students to sort of bounce ideas and build off of each other. So one student might give an answer, and then you just keep waiting, and then another student jumps in and builds on that, and you ask students to build on it, so that 2 or 3 people have answered and shared their ideas before it comes back to either you as the teacher or the other student can sort of continue the conversation. So you want to encourage multiple people to answer questions. So that gets us back then to other things we need to consider. So sometimes we need to redirect. So sometimes we want more than one student to respond. And so we can do that by redirecting the question to another student to comment on. So do you have anything else to add to this answer? Do you agree with the comment? You can do this, but you need to just be careful that you don't say, oh, so-and-so's comment is wrong. What should the right answer be? You want to avoid that negative piece. You want to redirect in a positive way that is going to build on and encourage a dialogue between the students, and to uncover the misconceptions, because then you can also have an opportunity for that first student who maybe said something wrong to clarify, or to respond and say, oh, okay, and maybe they'll come to the realization themselves. So you always want to be really careful that you're not overly negative when you're telling a student that their answer is wrong, because you don't want to tell them outright that their answer is wrong. So another way of doing that, or one strategy, is called volleyball, not ping pong, or table tennis, where the student asks the question to the group. The students then will give an answer, and then they continue to build off of each other's answer. Very similar to 2 or 3 before me. But in this particular case, you might actually encourage students to start asking their own questions and sort of continue passing it along, more like a little bit of a game, to get them to ask questions about a particular topic and encourage them to start asking questions that promote higher order thinking as well. Rephrasing. We are not perfect as teachers. And often when we ask questions, sometimes we ask a question that is very convoluted, or sometimes it just doesn't come out the way we expect it to come out. And the students just really don't understand what we're getting at. So if that's the case, or if you've asked a question that is quite difficult and students just aren't getting it, just take a step back and reword the question, clarify it, provide additional information if necessary. It's not about, asking questions in class is not about proving who knows what and getting the kids stuck. We really want them to engage, and we want everybody to be able to participate in that thinking process. So if the question we ask is not being understood by the students, we're never going to get a good answer. And often it's because we've asked a question that is not phrased properly, or maybe we've asked it and it's asking a little too much because the students aren't quite there in terms of their understanding. So don't hesitate to rephrase, reword, clarify the question, change how you ask it, maybe flip how you ask the question around so that you can really be clear. If you're not getting the answers that you want, chances are the question that you're asking is not the right question. And so that's something to think about. So one way of getting at the higher order thinking and to try and move away from just the what questions is what we call fact first questioning. So fact first questioning is you're turning a what question, which is really just a recall or remembering question, into a higher order thinking question where you're asking a how or a why question. So for example, this example from biology, I happen to teach biology. So what is cellular respiration? Well, that's a recall question. The student's just going to give me the process. But really what I want to understand is, do the students know why it's important? Why is it an important process? So I might reword the question and say, okay, class, we know that cellular respiration is an essential life process. Why is it an essential life process? And so then we would get into the students telling me about the process and why it's important. And then we could start asking about maybe different components of the process and why those are important to the process, or to the process of cellular respiration. So it opens the door for far more thinking and much deeper sort of analysis of the topic that you're looking at. Okay, again, thinking about thoughtful responses, probing. Students don't necessarily know how to support their answers. And they don't necessarily know how to express their thinking. And so as a teacher, we might need to probe. We can't expect them to just give us that beautiful answer with all the reasoning and all the arguments and all their conclusions. So sometimes you are going to need to have those follow-up questions to ask the students to go deeper into their thinking. So can you please share your assumptions? What evidence do you have for that? What's the relationship? Can you please elaborate on your or can you elaborate on your answer? So we want to ask students to sort of go deeper with their answers. So we don't accept the one-word answers. Sometimes, again, it's all dependent on context. If you're just trying to do a quick recall of facts, you're not going to be probing. But if you're asking them to reveal their thinking, you're absolutely going to be probing. And again, you just want to make sure that you're not explicitly stating that something is wrong. So if a student asks or answers a question incorrectly, you're going to probe them with, well, can you tell us, what assumptions are you making? Or what evidence do you have that makes you come to that conclusion? And so you're going to try and uncover where their thinking is and then help them sort of redirect and rephrase so that you can put them back on the right path. Prompting, again, very similar. You're going to help get them down the right path. You might need to break down the question and say, oh, let's take a step back. What about this? What about this? And you might actually scaffold the question for a student who's going down the wrong path to help support them in getting to the right answer, as opposed to just telling them, no, you're wrong. Once you tell a student, no, that's wrong in front of the whole class, they're never, ever going to answer again. And the same thing with your body language. If you accidentally roll your eyes or sigh or shrug, or have negative body language, you're going to turn off your students from answering questions. And then the other thing too is, just because a student gets it wrong, don't be afraid to ask them another question at some other point. Just because they got one question wrong doesn't mean they're going to get the next one wrong. So always make sure that we continue to ask students, because the first time you ask them a question, they might be a little nervous, but next time they're going to make sure, hopefully, that they know an answer, or that they've thought about it a little bit more carefully. So of these strategies, which one might you try that you haven't tried before, if there's any there? So I will get that poll up, please. And as we're doing the poll, we're going to start moving into time for you to ask some questions. So I'm going to, so we'll talk about the poll results, and then we'll turn it over to you to ask any questions, and hopefully I will be able to provide you with some answers. Okay, so variety of different ones. So that's excellent. So as I said, try them. Strongly recommend, in addition to some of these strategies, is really, if you haven't already built in that wait time and that think, pair, share, or that turn and talk to your classrooms, strongly encourage you to do that, because that will get away from just the same 2 or 3 students answering the questions every single time. We know that there's always going to be those keen students who want to answer. But if you do provide an opportunity for think time, all of these strategies will work really well, and they should be able to engage more students, because the students will feel more confident in answering the questions. Really, having students answer questions is about building their confidence, making them feel that their opinions matter, making them feel that they actually have something to contribute to the class discussion. And I think that's really important when we talk about having no answers, or students that are giving the wrong answers, is making sure that they really do understand that even if they have the wrong answer, it's a learning moment for not only them, but for other classmates too, that won't fall into the same trap. And it's better that it gets clarified in class than when they have to write their test or their exam, or they have to do a project and they're misled. So really important, particularly in a large class. It's tricky to understand where all of the misconceptions are, where all the students are. So the more that we hear from the students, the wider variety of students that we hear, and then the better questions that we ask, the better we're going to understand their student thinking. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sandeep for any questions.
I think if there are any questions, it will be good to have the members present the questions right now. Karthik, would you be there?
There are no questions as of now. I would request, if anybody has any questions, you can write them in the question and answer box. Okay, so we have one question.
Okay.
From Radha Anand. She's asking, how do you see this translate in smaller groups like 2 to 3?
So in a group of 2 to 3, the think, pair, share and the turn and talk are absolutely powerful So when you ask a question in a small group, obviously some of these strategies aren't going to work in a very, very large class or in a very small class. Sorry, you're not going to be able to do 2 or 3 before me if there's only 2 students or 3 students in a group. So what you might do in that particular case is you might give them the opportunity to think, pair, share, have that conversation with themselves before you engage with them in a conversation, so that you're not always the one giving them the answers or guiding their discussion. And you might conduct it more like a group discussion. So if you've got 2 students or 3 students, you might want to include and hear from all 3 given the conversation. So let them speak and then ask one to start responding, and then turn to the others and say, do you have anything to add? And ask them to come in from there, because obviously some of those strategies do not work in a very small class with 2 or 3 students. But the thinking, or the think, pair, share, the giving the students that wait time to think about their response and have that moment to speak to a peer about their response, is very, very powerful in that small group.
We can take one more question maximum. I will request the guests or the participants to click on the Q&A link that is there at the bottom of the screen and ask your.
Natalie, there's one more question. Actually, there are 2. So you can choose from the question and answer box, Natalie.
Okay. I'm just looking at the questions to see. Okay, so I think most of the questions, there are some very good questions here. So I think, how do we get students to basically engage and keep their attention, encourage them to ask questions, as well as, so I think number one, whenever you're asking questions, regardless of the level, regardless of the subject area, always build in some wait time. Make sure that you're making a very conscientious piece of the wait time. You might want to start with smaller groups, give them the opportunity to talk with each other. The think, pair, share, again, is very, very powerful if they're shying away from speaking. In a language class, it works really well as too, because maybe they have to speak in their own language to answer the question and practice it with each other before they come back to the big room. In a senior class, giving them the opportunity to talk can also do. I mean, you don't want to hide the questions that you're asking, so you want to make sure that they know that there's a question, but you want to make sure it's a safe question. So you want to give them the opportunity to talk and do that. So I would recommend think, pair, share is going to get them talking 100%. And if you want to know how you're doing in terms of questioning in class, I think the first thing that I would always do is I would actually set myself some goals at the beginning of the classroom. I would set out, these are the 3 key questions I want to ask. I know I'm going to ask other questions, but these are the ones that I'm purposely planning to ask. And then I'm going to keep track of, did I actually ask them during my lesson? And then after the last lesson, sort of reflect on, did I ask the questions and did I get the answers that I wanted? The other thing that's fun to do is if you have a colleague, somebody to come in and just observe you and see what types of questions you're asking and who you're getting to respond. It's sometimes fascinating to see that we have unconscious bias, and sometimes we tend to lean towards the kids that we know are going to answer the questions. And so I've had it where I've had somebody come in and will just watch me and say, okay, and they just keep track of who answered my questions, what questions I asked and who answered them. And they said, you do realize that you called on the same 3 students over and over again. And at the end of the day, I went, oh, I didn't do that. And I absolutely did. So sometimes having that self-reflection is really important. So that's probably what I would suggest, is if you have somebody come in and observe, that would be great. And I think,
Natalie, would you wish to answer any other question?
I'm just taking a look to see. So again, one question is, again, how do we get students to process before answering that question? So sometimes, that's a really good question, because sometimes just thinking about it in their head might not actually be the best way for a student to do it. So I might ask the student to pull out, students to, you know, I'm going to give you a minute or 2 to think, and I'm going to encourage you to either draw a diagram, sketch out a note, draw a flow chart, you know, write something down on paper. So that might be another way to ask students. So the students that aren't able to sort of process in their head, encourage them to pull out a paper during their think time. Thinking doesn't have to be just done in our head. Some people think by doodling, by drawing on paper, by doing things. So I would encourage students to think about what works for them in terms of how they process information, and give them an opportunity during that think time to use those strategies to help them think of their answer. So that would be another way during that think time. It doesn't just have to be all in the head think time. It could be think time on paper as well before they turn and talk to a friend. And for strategies for online lessons, I know that that's been a challenge. So one of the things to answer questions or to ask questions, answering questions, I like using what we call the 3-2-1 waterfall for things where I just want to do a diagnostic or a hook, where I ask the question, I give everybody 30 seconds or a minute to type their answer into the chat, because it's a smaller class, so probably your chat should be open. Or there are other tools that you can use as well for students to ask or to answer questions, like some of the online polling or the Mentimeter and some of the Padlet, some of the other tools where students can interact with. And then I would give them, you know, as I said, I would have them type their answer into the chat, but not hit enter, because that kind of singles out students. And then when everybody's ready, everybody hits enter, and then you would get everybody answering. And at first, students are slow, but you start off with non-threatening questions and get to the point where you know, students will want to participate, hopefully. You just want to make sure that if you are responding to student answers, that you are not singling them out if they've gotten it wrong, because the minute that you tell, especially online, that you shut down a student by telling them their answer is incorrect explicitly, they won't participate again. So you want to make sure that, you know, you say, oh, there were a wide variety of answers and I see everything from here to here, so let's discuss some of them. And you can talk about the correct answer, and then you can ask students to reflect on their answer, and was their answer actually in line with the correct answer? Or you can invite students to participate if they're comfortable. But we're finding on our end that students don't want to talk in class, so we have to do a lot through the chat to get students to participate. What if students, even when knowing the answers, prefer not to talk or discuss in class? So I think sometimes it's, you know, that would be for me a conversation with a student. If a student really is shying away from answering, most students, if they know that they're correct and that they feel safe, a lot of students will want to participate, but sometimes they do need a little bit of encouragement. And so explicitly go up to a student and say, listen, I know you know the answer to this. I'm going to ask you this question, and I will prep them and say, just to get them used to speaking. So if I know that I've got a student who really shies, doesn't like to speak in public, I will try to build their confidence, and I will go over their answer with them before they actually give it back to me in class. As they're talking, I might go around and have that conversation to really set them up for success. And that sometimes helps to sort of get them to come out of their shell a little bit. And I think that there was one question about applying in a language class. So again, I'm assuming that that's teaching a second language where they're, so I would actually use that think time to have them speak. They could speak in their own language, speak in the language that they're learning to practice their answer before they want to give it back to the class. Or I would also, and if it's like a language class, like an English, like a literature class or an English class, you can absolutely do the same thing where you give the students the time. Basically, the wait time is so critical. The think, pair, share is probably the most powerful technique you can do to allow students time to process the question that you've asked. So I would encourage you all to try it if you haven't done it, and be patient. Be very, very patient, because
yes, Natalie. Yeah, thank you so much for an absolutely and a fantastic session. This was something that we had been looking forward to since a long time, and this is one of the few sessions where we've seen the number of participants actually increasing as the session has gone ahead. And I'll quickly now move ahead with the panel discussion, being cognizant of the time that we have right now. I would like to invite Mr. Karthik to spotlight our esteemed panel members, Mr. Raylon, I'm really sorry. Miss Natalie is there. Miss Natalie Rudner, Director of Academics. Dr. Neeta Bali, School Director, GD Goenka World School, Sona Road. Miss Geeta Jagannathan, Founder, Managing Director, APL Global School, Chennai. Ms. Sonia Mehta, School Director, Pathways World School, Aravali, and Mr. Rajesh Vasudevan, Head of School, Manchester International School, Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu. Thank you all for joining us. It's a pleasure to meet you once again, and it's a pleasure to have you join this panel. I'll quickly move on with the first question to Dr. Neeta Bali. Dr. Bali, you heard what Ms. Natalie talked about, how to improve learning, especially student learning inside the classroom with some very straightforward strategies. Now, moving beyond these strategies, because you have decades of years as experience as an educator, you've seen what Ms. Natalie has given from the point of, I wouldn't say Western point of view, but from a very modern, advanced classroom point of view. But the Indian cultural context is also very critical. So given that, would there be any other tip you would want to share with the teachers out here to improve student learning? Something that they can walk away with. Of course, Ms. Natalie has given absolutely fantastic strategies, which probably I would use in my boardrooms now. But how would you want to?
Hello? Hello? I think there seems to be an internet issue with Dr. Sandeep.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah. Anyways, I think let me start answering because the others.
You got the crux of the question.
I've got the question anyways. Yeah, good evening. Hi, everyone. So I think Natalie has very, very beautifully explained what strategies can be used to enhance teaching learning in a classroom. But perhaps from my perspective, Natalie, there are one or two things that I think work really well. One, of course, is, in class, it's very important to ensure that teaching learning is absolutely student-centric. So to make it student-centric, I think you need to give some kind of provocation in class. So when you have provocation, children are forced to think. When they're forced to think, they're obviously going to come up with problems and find solutions. So rather than, a teacher asking questions, I think the questions need to come from the children, not so much from the teachers. Because although in India, particularly so with the national curriculum, the emphasis is more on teaching of content. But having said that, I think everyone is at liberty, particularly from grades nursery to 8, everyone is at liberty to experiment, to innovate, to improvise, to do what they want with the curriculum that they have on their platter. Although with the international curriculum, I think, fortunately, some of us here are heads of international schools. So we have that much advantage, we don't really have to force children to learn by rote and then regurgitate in the exam. I think we are fortunate that way because a lot of assessment that happens is internal assessment component and a component that insists on collaborative learning in groups, peer assessment, teacher assessment, and a lot of thinking goes into it. So assessment is not just pen and paper examination. So having said that, to my mind, I think important that in a class, you give students provocation, you ask them to raise questions, you ask them to ferret out answers, and more important than anything else, to get them to reflect on the learning. Because I really feel that, when you are done learning what you've learned, you also need to reflect on why you have learned what you have learned and how is it going to serve a purpose in the future. Because teaching learning is not just about, I think, needs to go beyond grades. So what purpose? To be able to relate it to real life, to be able to make connections. So I really think that in my point of view, that is very, very significant, and it can be done across all curricula. So Dr. Sandeep, as we said, if you look at an Indian context, even in the Indian context, I mean, nobody's stopping you from innovating or experimenting or improvising. And of course, the last thing that I'd like to say is, as a head of an international school, we give a lot of importance to student agency. So the students must have a voice. So let them, sometimes I think it's good also to allow children to design their own learning. And believe you me, when you allow them to design their own learning, the outcomes can be quite astounding sometimes. Thank you. That's what I wanted to say.
Absolutely. I think I agree with many of the points you say. I'm not a pure educator myself. I'm a corporate person, but I head schools like DPS schools, international schools out here in Bangladesh. So whatever you're speaking is absolutely, spot on with respect to the students learning in the modern global curriculum era. I would quickly move on to Mr. Rajesh Vasudevan. There's a question about application of curriculum versus contents of curriculum. Many times we have a curriculum that is given to the students and the teachers, and they have to complete that curriculum. There are learning objectives in every class, and they have to quickly cover those topics, and then they have to look at the marks. While on one hand, we have this thought wave of, we should give more time, we should reflect, we should allow the students independence in getting back, but we are faced with time pressures. So how do we move ahead? There is a curriculum that teachers have to teach. At the same time, progressive teaching talks about teaching them the application of the curriculum rather than just teaching them the curriculum. How would you balance the time pressures that are there versus the innovative way in curriculum can be taught if you had?
Thank you for that wonderful question, Dr. Sandeep. I would like to take it forward from where Dr. Nita Bali had stopped. Unless you make a learning irrelevant an experience for a child, no matter what you do in the class, it's all going to go down the drain. Now, whether you teach the content or you're teaching them the concept or you're teaching them a skill or you're giving them a piece of knowledge, the child is not given an opportunity to perform. The knowledge remains an information. It doesn't transfer to become a wisdom, right? So as Nita Bali said, Dr. Nita Bali said, I'm privileged to work in a school, an international curriculum where we follow the IB Continuum program. We move from transdisciplinary to interdisciplinary to a combination of disciplinary and interdisciplinary in the diploma program. So here, unless there's no direct question that we ask in the classroom as to define what photosynthesis or define what, talk about Macbeth's character, we don't do that. We give them a context from the real life and we ask the children, how do you apply what you've learned? That platform should be given right from the primary year program. That is one of the reasons why, I'm not discounting any national curriculum because I'm one of the products of that. So I cannot say that if I'm sitting and talking here, this is because of the thick knowledge that I received during my school days. But said that, we have moved from a VUCA world, to, now the new acronym is BA-NI, that's what they call it. Brittle, anxious, non-linear kind of a world that we are in. So when the world is moving from towards non-linear thinking, how does linear process work for children? So definitely there has to be content taught. I'm not saying it shouldn't be taught. You need to teach the content, but that is just not enough. You have to make sure that, this is just like this, Sandeep. You teach them a song, but what's the point when you don't give them a scope of performance? The song remains as just lyrics. The singer should become the song. The learner should become the subject. The dancer should become the dance, right? So that's the whole thing, it is not about finding a balance. It's about finding relevance, giving the children the purpose of education, the real meaning of education, the real purpose of education, telling the children, this is why you learn this, and this is what you're going to do, not just after the school hours. This is what you'll be applying when you are facing the real world outside the walls of the school.
Thank you Thank you, Mr. Rajesh. Vasudevan, your point is, I think, of course, there are many perspectives to your point, but the part that you said that knowledge remains information and does not become wisdom unless you allow them to apply and learn. That is something that is very significant in what you said. I'll move on to Ms. Geeta Jagannathan, and thank you for joining us here, ma'am. The question I'm going to ask you is something which I've thought about once Ms. Natalie talked about the think, pair, and share strategy. She was basically referring to allowing students to move away from the individual self and take the help of the environment, which is the immediate classmate or friend who's sitting by the side. But what if we move ahead and we allow students to, go beyond that? If a question is asked, whether in an exam or within the classroom, we allow them more time. We allow them time to research the internet, to have books and come up with the answer after significant research. When I say significant, instead of giving them 3, 5, 10 seconds or 1 minute, give them 10 minutes and tell them, go out, talk to your friends, get your books, go on the net and get me the right answer. How would you think about extrapolating this strategy of think, pair, share beyond that moment to a larger setting? What would your...
Well, I think that would be wonderful. But I presume this presentation was concentrated more on within a classroom, a one classroom session. So, and I love that she started with the idea of creating a safe space. So what you're talking about, going further deeper into the question, going into research and all that is definitely very welcome, very needed, because that's when the child gets ownership of the learning. By what Rajesh said, that you become the dance. So that happens when you go into research yourself and you own the learning from the research that you have done. And think, pair, share can come in there also. If you are doing it in tandem with a peer, and if you can share the results of your research with your peer, it becomes that much more significant. We all learn better when we teach. So if I've learned something from my research and I come back and I share it, it gets clarified in my mind and it sits well with me. So I really think that's a wonderful idea.
Thank you, Ms. Geeta Jagannathan. Would you want to expand this idea into even examinations, where you allow the child to give examinations after there being a time pressure? They be given the question, and would you think that's progressive testing?
Yes, it is. In fact, we have been thinking of replacing our formative assessment tests with open book tests, because as we commonly say nowadays, knowledge is available. It is how you interpret it and apply it that is the real learning that's happening now. So an open book test is something that we would really welcome.
I move on to Ms. Sonia. Thank you again, ma'am, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here. As a school director at Pathways World School, which you've used a lot of technology to improve student learning. Now, I ask you, what kind of technologies have you used inside the classroom in today's era to expand student learning, especially in the online era or the blended hybrid era? What would you suggest to teachers to improve student learning using technology? Would there be any kind of points you would like to bring out?
I'm sure all the teachers would be familiar with the applications that are really commonly being used. Flipgrid, Wakelet. There are a multitude of, Google Forms. There are a multitude of them. What we have found to be quite effective, also reflecting on one of the questions that was asked about, how you engage children in online learning. There are applications called Nearpod and Pear Deck, which I'm sure also a lot of teachers will be familiar with, where teachers can embed in questions during their presentation, and therefore the question is then posed to the children while the teacher is teaching and they have to answer. And the teacher also then sees who all have answered, who all have not answered, because he or she has their separate dashboard which they can monitor. So children are then also able, the teacher can monitor who is actively participating in the class, because for all you know, there could be children with their cameras turned off, but they are listening. You know, I think all of us have now reached a time when all of us are completely screen fatigued. And, you know, that could be a reason why our children don't want to turn their cameras on. But as long as they are participating in the class and are showing that they are listening, then maybe we don't need to be so insistent on having them all have their cameras on.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Sonia Mehta. This is something very important for teachers also. If they can learn better methods to engage students, that would be fantastic. Talking about that, I wanted to quickly bring to your the forefront. You know, I was researching a few of the US and Canadian schools where now it's not just an attendance system that is taken, it's an engagement record that is also maintained. So parents are getting an attendance record, how many classes did your child attend, and then they are getting an engagement record that in each class, how much engaged was your child, and there are percentage figures. And this was really eye-opening because till now I had never heard of an engagement report, class by class. Now, I'm sure how each and every student inside classroom. It would be great to know about this further. But connecting to that is the point that if a student is engaged, then a student can become a teacher himself. You know, there was a reverse psychology concept where Miss Natalie also was talking about, probe, give some independence to the student, do a volleyball kind of a thing where they ask many questions, they build on the questions. So can we use this reverse psychology? It used to happen on Teachers' Day where students became teachers, but can we use this as an active psychology that when we have a topic, we ask a few students to prepare and become the teacher and then come back into the classroom and present? Dr. Neeta Bale, I would pose that question to you. What would be your thoughts on this reverse psychology of absolutely increasing engagement by making the student himself or herself a teacher?
Dr. Sandeep, I completely agree with this. When I started talking and I spoke about provocation and I said, and I ended by saying, let students design their own learning. Okay, so when we say students must design their own learning, this could be one way of designing your own learning, this reverse process. Rather than a teacher bringing content to a classroom, in a flipped classroom, for example, you would ask the children to come prepared with a certain, set of questions, having read up themselves. So in any case, the process is reversed. It's not the teacher delivering the content or speaking about the content. It's the other way around. The students have already read the content, so you're not wasting time. And I think we've done this umpteen number of times. It's worked really well. And in fact, it makes the classroom so vibrant because children feel more engaged. They feel responsible for their own learning, because if you've given them a certain content to study prior to coming to a class, the process is reversed because the learner essentially becomes a self-teacher. You bring those ideas to the classroom, you bring them, you learn with the others, you learn with the peers, and the teacher also becomes a co-learner. Let me tell you, very often, in a classroom, I am a classroom teacher and I teach a subject called theory of knowledge. I have never called myself a teacher. In fact, the learning that happens in the classroom, we are all co-learners. There's so much I learn from children. So I think now gone are the days, at least I feel very strongly about this. A teacher can, at best you can call them a facilitator. But to my mind, a teacher is also co-learner. So I think this is a great way reversing this process. getting the children to come into the classroom, having read the content and be prepared with their questions, and allowing them an opportunity to expound their views, allowing them an opportunity to discuss mutually, to draw conclusions, and a brainstorming session where the teacher, as I said, could be something of a, as I said, just a facilitator or a moderator, could to ensure that the discussion goes in the right direction. So I think that's a great way of reversing the process, is a great way of enhancing learning. And we've tried it and it works really, really well. And that's what I think flipped classrooms are all about.
Thank you, Dr. Bali. Thanks for
Dr. Sandeep, if I could just add to that.
Absolutely, Ms. Sonia. Please go ahead.
Children or students learn much better from each other than they would from teachers as well. So when you have students leading certain smaller modules in the classroom, which they're given time to prepare, you will find that the engagement in the classroom is a lot more.
Yes.
And they understand it much better because somebody who's teaching it is their age group and they know, what examples to use and how to connect to them in a way that even with us adults who are trained sometimes fail to do.
Sonia, in fact, if I may add very quickly, just one sentence, Dr. Sandeep, if I may take the liberty to add to what Sonia just said. In fact, in our classrooms, and I'm sure in your classrooms as well, often I think a lot of teaching happens through presentations, which are made by students. It doesn't really, it's not teacher oriented at all. So even if you're studying literature, I think a bunch of students in small groups, you're asked to make a presentation. Everybody gets to speak, even those who are very reticent and withdrawn are also forced to contribute. So I think that's really effective, reversing that process. I've seen when a teacher starts to, in the past, as a classroom teacher, I realized when I would teach literature, children would say, why are we talking about the storyline or the plot? We already know that. So let's get on to the next thing. So see, it's only a matter of giving them an opportunity. So if you have this kind of group work where children are allowed to make presentations, they're prepared and come to class, they're making the presentations, I think learning is really in-depth and is there to stay. I don't know if you agree with me, but I think we do this a lot, in our classrooms.
That's fantastic. I also know that Mr. Rajesh Vasudeva goes into the classroom and teaches himself for a significant amount of time. And that allows him to be hands-on with his experiences of how students react to these points. Now, going ahead with my last question of the panel discussion, being again cognizant of the time, this goes to Ms. Natalie. Ms. Natalie, thank you for an absolutely amazing session. Now, I'll go back to your last question, which was a choice between or a combination of 4 strategies: no hands questioning, fact first questioning, volleyball, not ping pong, and 2 or 3 before me. And I'm trying to put you into a corner out here. If a teacher who does not have time to practice all these 4 strategies and he or she has time or has to learn one of these strategies as a first step, as a starting step, then which one of these 4 will you recommend that a teacher follows? Because if a teacher has not inculcated any of these strategies objectively or consciously, and if we are telling them, okay, go ahead, now practice these 4 strategies, but which one should they start with? Perhaps they want to start with one of them. Which one would you recommend and why?
You did put me on the spot. So I think, first of all, I'd like to just say that I do agree with Dr. Bali about and Ms. Mehta about making sure that the classroom is student-centered. That's a whole other conversation about how do you structure a classroom so that the students can be at the center and really direct the learning and take ownership of that learning. So, absolutely very excited to hear that it's happening in classrooms, and I recognize the importance of that, and really is the way of the future. So as to your question, I think I think really it's about encouraging students to think. I don't think there's actually one wrong or one right strategy to pick, because I think different teachers interact with their students in different ways. And it's based on the comfort of the teacher to a certain extent in terms of how they're doing it. I think the one thing that is fundamental to all of these is that wait time and that opportunity for students to be able to have the time to process the question. And I think all of these strategies really are about ensuring that you're hearing from multiple voices in the classroom, not just the 3 or 4 students that have the answer every single day. So how you do that, you don't even have to use one of these strategies per se. I think my takeaway would be that is as a teacher trying to improve your questioning would be, the first thing I would say is plan 1 or 2 questions that you're going to answer or that you're going to ask before you go into the lesson. If you know what you're doing, what's the one really important question you want students to really think about? Make sure that you give them the time to process it. Make sure you give them the time to think about it in the classroom. And then how you choose to unpack their answers and move that really is going to depend on the classroom and your comfort. And, so really make sure that you're choosing or that you're allowing multiple students the opportunity to participate. And how you do that, I don't care. If you do it with hands up, that's fine, but just don't pick the same hands every single time. So I think that would be my message, don't marry yourself to one of these strategies. Try them, for sure, try them. But at the very least, give the students time, be patient as an educator, be comfortable with the silence or be comfortable with the noise that comes from students discussing answers. So, there's the silence while you're waiting for the students to think quietly, but thinking doesn't always have to be a quiet activity. They could be talking to each other and talk, so be comfortable with either the silence while you wait or the sound while they're talking and they're having those conversations. And as everybody has mentioned, be that co-learner, be part of the conversation. There's no reason why you can't engage with students and ask them, even in their small groups as they're discussing, have you thought about, can you tell me a little bit more, and help them understand how they can uncover their thinking and model how we get deeper when you're answering a question. So I think that's where I would leave it.
Thank you, Ms. Natalie. Not taking it much further, an absolutely fantastic session once again. I've heard from your workshop, the session that you took, and from the panel members. And I can say that, when you took a workshop, one of the key things that I learned, I think everybody would have understood, is that when you were trying to focus on learning, especially student learning, improving student learning, it did not start from the students, it started from the educator. And you went into the philosophy of the educator, where you were talking about, what Ms. Beta Jagannathan also noted. You were talking about improving the concept of thinking, culture of thinking, using a safe space concept, that until there's a space inside the classroom, the student cannot even start learning. And you absolutely give some important points for creating that safe space from internalizing the fact that we learn from mistakes, we create together, and we celebrate each other's successes or failures. We empathize with that. We respect each other. We try our best, and we are a team. Now the teacher who believes in that, in however environment it may be, I think that's the start to a great classroom, to a great learning. You also moved ahead with I think that was the best part. Even though you moved on to the actual strategy of questioning, you went into the philosophy of what is a quality question? Why should a question actually be there? What is the objective of even asking? And finally, when you went to strategic questioning, and you gave some fantastic strategies that these teachers can use, including waiting for some time, not going back to the same children who were asking the questions, or not discouraging a person who's given a wrong answer, and ensuring that students are given tools, including help from their peers to answer, and some immediate to do strategies. These are very, very doable. These are not some textbook that you are speaking. These are things that I'm sure that the participants out here would immediately go ahead and do. From there on, we moved on to the panel, and I think the panel discussion was very insightful. I think my best discussion that I would say was from the reverse psychology concept of making the student a teacher, and what Dr. Neeta Bali said, that she's been letting students design their own learning, what actually she talked about. And rather than the teacher bringing the topic, let the student design their own topic. The curriculum might be standard, but the student can design the topic. The student can be the teacher. And if the student does it, it works really well. And I liked one part, Dr. Bali, that you said that you've never called yourself a teacher and that you always called yourself a facilitator or a co-learner. I think that's one
No,
starting
Sandeep, I
step.
really think I'm a co-learner. Believe you me, in a
Right.
TMA classroom,
Right.
very often when I get
Right.
stuck when making
Right.
presentations,
Right.
it's the children
Right.
who come to my rescue. So I'm very much a co-learner.
No, absolutely, absolutely. You know, these are words that stay with us forever. I also, you know, remembered what Ms. Sonia Mehta said, that students perhaps obviously can't teach the whole big subject, but if they take up those smaller modules and they are given something that they can handle, then engagement increases immediately. And they understand it also a lot when they are themselves doing the research. So that's something that I really loved, these points. That I think the think, pair, share strategy going into an open book system, Ms. Geeta Jagannathan, your points were also very relevant, where you said that you started with the concept of safe space too. I'm unsure, you know, of how important I felt it was until you reiterated it, because it might have just been a slide, but the moment I realized that you're giving it importance, I realized it is important. I perhaps never thought that it was such an important point, but you're right that the moment that a student starts getting more support for their learning and proactive support, where they are not put under time pressure, where they are allowed more freedom to research and extrapolate their own learning, I think that does give them strengthened learning. What you say. Finally, Mr. Rajesh Vasudevan, the point about, I repeat the point that you said that if the child is not given an opportunity and the knowledge remains information and does not become wisdom, I think you should quote unquote this and keep it on your Facebook so that children see that. The context that you said, that you are giving context from real life and how to apply what they are learning is really important, because real life learning or real life applications become embedded in their thoughts, become embedded in their memories for a long time to come. So, you know, with this summary, I think I hope I've summarized what has been discussed in the workshop and what has been discussed in the panel. Of course, Ms. Sonia, I also note how you added about a few of the technology tools that can be used by teachers. That was also very valuable. So with these words, I give my formal vote of thanks to all of you, Ms. Natalie. Once again, your background, the amount of research you've done for this workshop, and the way you have presented this workshop in a matter of 45 minutes to 50 minutes is commendable. The people who were participating out here are very acclaimed educators, the participants as well as the panel, and I'm sure that they mirror my thoughts when I say, when I convey my thanks to you for giving this time ex gratia and absolutely sharing some of the most important and insightful strategies that teachers can use. I'll take this opportunity to also thank Mr. Ralam Nazarat, Senior Manager of Rosedale Academy. Thank you for organizing this and making this happen, Ralam. And to all the participants who attended this workshop from various schools across India, including Pathways, Manchester International School, APL Global School, Lotus Valley International School, Alphon Public School, and of course, GD Goenka World School, apart from so many other schools that we've seen in the list of participants. Thank you for all participants. And my thanks to Ms. Mridu and Mr. Karthik for being fantastic coordinators of all our workshops. Thank you for ensuring these workshops happen and learning is there and share all platforms, goes with the vision of CIR. Finally, and most importantly, my thanks to the panel members, Dr. Nita Bali, Ms. Geeta Jagannathan, Ms. Sonia Mehta, Mr. Rajesh Vasudevan. The fact that you were there ensures that people remember that these words that are spoken, are important. They carry huge value. And I'm sure that CI, when it does the summary minutes of these discussions and shares, we will bring out all the points that you have shared with us and something that teachers can follow for a long time. One of the questions, Ms. Natalie, also was whether the presentation can be shared with all the teachers. I hope, these, whatever are the important parts of the presentation, if you can share, it'll go a long way in have something like a primer for teachers, which they can go back to when they want to improve their class learning. Thank you so much, everybody, for this participation. And with these words, I call this session to a close. Thank you, Karthik. Thank you, Mridu. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. So much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.